Sanctions are an act of war when you prevent goods and services from going into a country. To me, the greatest danger is that we will have a president that will overreact, that we will soon bomb Iran. How do we treat people when they have a nuclear weapon? With a lot more respect. What did we do with Libya? We talked to them, we talked them out of their nuclear weapon, and then we killed them.
GOP presidential candidate Ron Paul being criticized for his foreign policy plans, which many of his rivals say are too weak and too hands-off. But despite Paul's views, the Texas congressman is soaring in the polls, even has a very good shot at winning the Iowa caucus. Take a look at this recent poll. Ron Paul, 23% of the vote compared to Mitt Romney at 20, Newt Gingrich at 14. What if Paul wins the nomination? Let's ask Republican strategist and former advisor for the McCain-Palin campaign, Ford O'Connell. Good morning, Ford, and Merry Christmas. You say Ron Paul is, quote, dangerous. Voting for him would be a, quote, wasted vote. Why?
Well, Merry Christmas, Dave. I do think it is, because I do think that once general election voters sort of get a whiff of Ron Paul's foreign policy, coupled with his sort of controversial newsletters, President Obama is pretty much all but guaranteed to win re-election.
Yeah, the controversial newsletters, Ron Paul has yet to really come up with much of an explanation for some of the anti-Semitic and racial writings in these. But you back this up with some polls. Here's what the results would look like. Hypothetically, Romney versus Obama, it's about even. But when Ron Paul is thrown in the mix, the president blows away Mitt Romney. Do you think there is any chance, though, that Ron Paul would run as a third-party candidate?
Nothing shocks me. This is the craziest primary season I've seen yet, and maybe a very crazy general election season. But I will say that if Ron Paul enters the race as a third-party candidate, again, President Obama is all but guaranteed re-election. And that's why for the GOP to beat President Obama, we all have to be on board and we have to be unified. The one thing that concerns me about Ron Paul is that he hasn't yet ruled out a possible third-party run. And when he did lose the nomination in 2008, he wasn't exactly a team player within the GOP. It wasn't so much he didn't nominate John McCain, it was that he held a protest rally outside the GOP convention in Minnesota. So, Ron Paul has said many a time he's not a team player, and this really concerns me and a lot of GOP voters across the country.
What would it mean for Iowa itself if Ron Paul wins the Iowa caucus? What would it mean for their importance in this process, not to mention their place in the order of things?
I think a lot of GOP primary voters are concerned about what could happen should Ron Paul win the Iowa caucuses, because he'll gain a lot of momentum and he'll gain a lot of airtime given the 24/7 news cycle. And I think a lot of folks right now, given Iowa's track record in the past of picking folks who don't go on to win the nomination, could eventually hurt, future presidential nominees. And we may guess really what the order in the future should be and whether or not Iowa should lead off.
You're most concerned, obviously, about Ron Paul's foreign policy stance. But what does it say, do you think, about the electorate, about the Republican Party, and about young voters who love this guy and who are out campaigning, knocking on doors, doing all the work that some other candidates don't have young people doing? What does it say about them that Ron Paul's doing so well?
I think that Ron Paul connects with them, really well on fiscal policy, and I think that his point about America not needing to be sort of the international policeman is right. But at the same time, going out there and saying we can't use sanctions as an option, given the instability around the world, particularly in Iran and North Korea, it's a real issue. And I think a lot of young voters really need to think twice before they cast a vote for Ron Paul. But again, I'm all for democracy, and if that's who they choose, so be it.
Ford O'Connell, I would imagine the folks are fired up this morning. We appreciate you being with us this morning. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Dave, and thank you for having me on.